We're going to start out talking 49ers today. A couple things to me that were pretty interesting. One was Peter King on with Willard and Dibbs yesterday talking about Brock Purdy. And I do want to kind of get into Kyle Shanahan's role in his development. But also just the idea of Kyle Shanahan and talking before the game to his team about the Cowboys, Evan. He said, you know what? If we lose, but we play the right way, that game will be a success tomorrow. That's what he said Saturday night. He talked about the possibility of losing to his team, and he downplayed it. And I think the moral of the story is he wanted to make sure his team, the 49ers, actually treated it just like another game. That's what it sounded like to me.
And I think it aligns with what we also heard post-game from Fred Warner, from Nick Bosa, from a lot of the leaders, specifically on the defensive side, but also even a guy like Brock Purdy, who's still pretty young and, to his credit, has never lost a football game in the regular season. The guys simply approach and did approach Sunday Night Football like I'm assuming they're going to approach this upcoming Sunday against Cleveland. Very different situations, very different opponents, perhaps more kind of juice behind the Cowboys game and Cowboys week as opposed to the Cleveland Browns. But that's that. It's not a laissez-faire attitude, but it's a blue-collar, workman-like attitude that I think Kyle Shanahan has had throughout his entire time in San Francisco. But in a season like this, where you're coming off of such heartbreak in an NFC Championship game, I think it is difficult to try and get yourself on a different mental level each and every week. And so Kyle Shanahan's approach is, well, let's just maintain the same one. We know that our roster is probably good enough to beat the majority of football teams around this league. And if we don't take ourselves out of the game, if we don't approach it the way that the Cowboys did, which was clearly undisciplined, maybe a little bit putting too much on that game and the emphasis on winning it, like, I just think Kyle Shanahan believes that his team at an even-keeled state are good enough talent-wise and also with the ability to execute the way that they do. Like, there's no team that's going to be able to beat them unless something severely wrong happens.
I had a coach once who, one of his sayings was, we establish the level of play, and if the other team can meet it, then they can meet it, and we'll play them down to the wire. If they can't meet it, then we're just going to win by the way we're going to win. And that's, to me, a little bit like what the 49ers are doing. I actually think it's easier for pro teams, the players and the coaches, to I think fans get more caught up in, wow, Cowboys, that's a big game. Cleveland's a little bit lesser of an important game, even though in terms of the conference, it isn't. But what I'm saying is, I do think that the players, for the most part, are able to compartmentalize. And it's not that they didn't know Dallas was the opponent Sunday. Of course they knew Dallas was the opponent on Sunday, and it was a big game, and that Dallas is a good team. But I do think that's what they are. They're a good team. They're one of the top three teams in the NFC. Let's go out, play them, see where we stand. Okay, we beat them. Now who do we got? We got the Cleveland Browns. You know what? They got a really good defense. Let's go there. Like, I do think that this team's mentality doesn't take into account to too great a degree who the opponent is. They're trying to do what they are wanting to do.
And I think that's because they understand the only opponent that really matters are the ones in January and February.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you can just skip past games. It doesn't mean you can overlook opponents. But I do think that more than any other season, Kyle Shanahan has approached this year from a macro level view. Each and every game is a step towards the ultimate prize. Not one is not more important than the other. All that matters is stacking W's. And to their credit, they've been able to do that better than all but one team in football, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. And what did we say coming into the season, Steiny? That it was all about maintaining a pace and keeping the exact same line as the Eagles. Because whether you believe the 49ers are better, whether you believe that they're worse, I personally think there's no argument against them looking worse than the Eagles right now. I think they've looked like the best team in football through 5 weeks. But at the end of the season, if you're in a position to have home field advantage, that's another box that you have to check. And so right now, the 49ers, better than any other team, have checked every single box at just about every single level and phase of the game. And so when I hear Kyle Shanahan say to his team prior to arguably the biggest game so far of the NFL season and the biggest matchup that people are looking towards, this is just another game, that to me, it does give me a little more insight into the mind of Kyle Shanahan and the attitude, which I don't think has largely changed since he's gotten here. But now that he has every single piece at his disposal, he can finally implement that every single game matters. But at the end of the day, we're really playing for February.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking yesterday about Purdy, and I was asking, how can he possibly look better? He's already been undefeated in his regular season games. And the one thing I thought about was, well, one way he could be better or show improvement is, I guess what? You go into Cleveland and you don't turn it over and you score 3 or 4 touchdowns on offense and the defense is solid. And maybe we're looking at 31-13 in Cleveland. And at that point, you realize that this team's essentially taken every team apart, and the level of play that they've established can't be touched by anybody.
No, and I think Cleveland's a game, and I know we'll talk about it later in the week, but I think that's a game where there's a different kind of challenge, and it's going to be specific to Brock Purdy because Cleveland also has a pretty good defense, but Deshaun Watson didn't practice today. We don't know if it's going to be Dorian Thompson-Robinson, what quarterback's going to be under center for a Cleveland offense that's already been kind of marginal throughout this year. But you're right. It is a different kind of challenge. It's a 10 a.m. game on the East Coast. It's probably going to be not so great weather. Forecast is looking like 55, maybe a bit of rain, so there could be something else to throw at Purdy. But that doesn't mean that I have any less faith that he's not going to win that football game and then he's not going to do it handedly because he's passed every single test thus far. And to me, this is just a different kind of test.
Has he played in the rain? Has he played in the rain?
Not in downpour. Not
Purdy
yet.
played in the rain? I tell you what, I know it does. It doesn't rain a lot in Ames. Where's it? Des Moines, Iowa City,
Ames, Iowa. Yeah, Iowa State.
We may have found it, ladies and gentlemen. Can Purdy quarterback in the rain and/or the snow? And what about wind? What about high winds?
Oh, he's been doing it his whole life. No, actually, he's been.
We're running out of stuff. I know that.
But it kind of reminds me just on paper of the game last year against Washington where we were talking all week about how Washington's got that incredible defensive line. They got Montez Sweat. Chase Young was coming back. Other big boys up front that could pose a problem. And Brock Purdy absolutely diced them, and the 49ers put up 30 points. So, look, I don't think this is a game where I'm going to look too much into it, but I do think that there is something there to Brock Purdy and how much he is either reliant on Kyle Shanahan or how much Kyle Shanahan is reliant upon him. Because I find it very difficult, Steiny, to disjoint them, to not look at them as one and the same. Because I don't think Brock Purdy is as successful as he is without Kyle Shanahan. And it's very clear from the last 6 years of having watched quarterbacks in San Francisco that Kyle Shanahan is not as successful without Brock Purdy. So how does that offense continue to roll? I don't know if it can improve, but I do think there are different degrees of difficulty that Brock Purdy can continue to go against and continue to prove that he can succeed in those.
Yeah, I think you're right. The next step for Purdy is to, they scored 40, they're scoring 33 a game. Well, let's assume they're not going to be able to score 33 a game in the playoffs. Okay. Well, can you score 27 a game in the playoffs, but still not turn the ball over? Yeah, that's just as good. If you're playing a really good team in the playoffs, you're not going to be expected to score 38. Maybe if it's a shootout, those things happen. But the reality is all you'd want out of Purdy is the same kind of performance with maybe the understanding that it's not going to be as impressive because they're going to be going up against a really good defense. But as long as he doesn't turn the ball over, that's the number one thing we're talking about right now. He doesn't turn the ball over. If you don't turn the ball over, you're going to have to play pretty well to beat the Niners.
Well, and the 49ers did turn the ball over against the Cowboys. I know it wasn't Purdy, but they did fumble. And I think that was their second turnover of the season.
Right.
The turnover battle was even in that game, and Dallas lost by 32 points. Like, that is, to me, yes, Purdy's a huge part of that, but that's just the separation that the Niners, they have so many different ways to beat you. Like, for example, if the 49ers only score 20 points in a monsoon-like game this weekend against Cleveland, or if they score 24.
Right.
You think Cleveland's scoring 24 points against that defense? Like, that's the other part of it, too,
exactly.
is that the 49ers, if they're scoring 30 points, and you can pretty much pencil that in, like Kyle Shanahan has had elite offenses in the past as far as scoring points. He's done it as a coordinator. He's done it as, quality control with teams early in his career. He's done it even with the 49ers. But to me, he's never had an offense that has performed at this level and a defense that has been this dominant in the same season. That, to me, is the difference between the teams that Kyle Shanahan has coached in San Francisco and even before, and the one he has in 2023. This is an elite team that you can make the argument has the number one offense and the number one defense, and they don't hurt themselves. They're buttoned up, they're disciplined, they execute, and that's the reason why not only they're 5-0, but they have a plus 99 point differential. They're the best team in football.
Well, and they also may have the MVP.
I've not asked a soul, but there are 50 voters. I certainly would vote for him. He's the leading quarterback in the NFL, playing for the best team in the NFL. It's hard to imagine that he wouldn't win it.
And that was Peter King on with Willard and Dibbs yesterday, saying if the season were to end today, keep in mind we're only 29% done with the season, but if the season were to end today, he said he thinks Brock Purdy would win the MVP. And if using the criteria, Spadoni, that I've used my entire life for most valuable players, I have a system, and I think it should be implemented worldwide when it comes to most valuable players.
Please explain.
And I will. Peter King's right. You don't start with the player. You start with teams. Who's the best team in the league? Then you ask yourself, do they have an MVP-worthy candidate? And if they do, that's the MVP. The best player on the best team. Under that scenario right now, I think it's Purdy. The 49ers are 5-0. And if you want to say McCaffrey, you can say McCaffrey, but the bottom line is traditionally it's quarterback. So it's the Tim Duncan theory. Well, the Spurs were 60-22. That's the best record in the league. And Tim Duncan's the best player on that team, and he's really, really good. So it's Tim Duncan. So it's done.
So lock it up.
Yeah.
Brock Purdy's the MVP.
Right now, through 5 games.
But last week we were talking about how Christian McCaffrey was the MVP.
Well, he had and that's one of the things that...
And last week it was a different defensive player of the year than it was this week because Fred Warner was unbelievable against Dallas.
No doubt. No doubt. But that's the point of the exercise, Evan, is to acknowledge it's early in the season and that because it's so early in the system, there can be a lot of volatility from one game to another. For example, if Brock Purdy, if for some reason the 49ers were to stub their toe in Cleveland, Brock Purdy, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, he won't be the leader in the clubhouse after week 6.
You sure about that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I think so.
See, right now, I think
Josh Allen takes over for him, or Mahomes, or even Jalen Hurts.
That assumes Josh Allen doesn't lose in London again. I think that right now they're...
So unfair to play there.
What do you mean? Jacksonville had to play there twice.
Exactly.
Back-to-back weeks.
Well, that's different.
With no home cooking.